Today's topic on Critical Insights, cybersecurity standards that apply to North American utilities. What is the purpose of the CIP standards?
The CIP standards, they were brought about in order to address cybersecurity in the critical infrastructure, especially electricity. The electric sector had no cybersecurity standards to start with. No other critical infrastructure really had any standards that were mandatory at all. So the CIP standards were the first to come out to be mandatory, and their purpose was to push the sector toward better security, but also accountability. It's a very much an accountability type of standard where it assures that there is a significant amount of assurance around privileges, accesses, managing the accounts, assuring that you have identified the right systems and you're protecting those systems from physical and cybersecurity harm. So their purpose is to, originally, was just to get utilities started instead of giving what I called lip service back in the day about cybersecurity, to really start doing it. So the purpose was to set out a set of mandatory standards to kickstart the utilities, electric sector, into doing better cybersecurity. And if they didn't, they were going to get huge fines. So there was incentive to do better, and that was the primary purpose of those CIP standards.
Have the CIP standards made any improvement over the last decade?
I often get asked, has CIP standards moved the needle? Has they increased cybersecurity protections for the electric sector? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. They did a fantastic job. I was there before CIP and working for an electric utility where cybersecurity was kind of the ugly stepchild to everything else. You did the bare minimum to make the state commissioners go away. There wasn't really a regulator at the federal level at that time. You still had FERC, you had a number of regulators that were poking around asking questions, but there was no real mandatory approach to assuring that you were doing a base set of cybersecurity controls. And when these standards came out, there was a lot of resistance to it because the voluntary type of standards they had before, everybody was saying they were doing it, and we're perfect, we're great. But when you applied a set of standards with an audit regime behind it, where you had people coming out and checking your work, and it being a performance-based set of standards, it required people to really do it and really show that they're doing it and doing it all the time, not as a hobby. It's been over a decade. There's been lots of modifications to these standards, but a lot of it is word game stuff. So I think we're at a point where we probably should pause and see whether we're still making a difference. Are we still improving? And if not, what should we be doing? Rather than taking more spot issues. An example is, we had a physical attacks in North Carolina on substations, and that was the knee-jerk reaction is we got to fix CIP 14, which was about substations and the physical protections around them. Well, so all the focus is on that, and it's good. We need to do that, but let's look at the entire suite of CIP standards and see what has been done. Are they still making improvements? And do we need to adjust? And not just necessarily the CIP standards. Do we need to adjust the way we're auditing this? Do we need to look at it from more of an assessment process versus a performance-based? Where are we in that regime? We need to look at it holistically, and we need to look at it. I think for the last 5 years, I've been calling for a CIP reform, where we go in and just reform the entire program. But it doesn't need to be that drastic. But I think it really needs someone to sit down and think about, where are we? And have we moved that needle far enough? And what do we need to do now? We really need to think about this more holistically and see. I think it's more about the audit approach right now. We need to think about how we're auditing and how we're helping utilities do better.
What CIP standards are utilities struggling with?
CIP standards are hard. They just really are overall. The smaller you are, the harder they are, because it doesn't really seem to matter how big you are or how small you are. There's still an abundance of work to do. A lot of documentation to demonstrate that you're performing correctly. some of the hardest ones, the ones that you create your own adventure. Write a plan, implement the plan. This is SIP 13, SIP 14, a lot of those in the O&P standards, which are the operation and planning standards. But in the SIP side, there's only a few of those, and those are the hardest ones because you don't know really what is necessary to be successful. You have some hints because the standards often say, at a minimum, include these things. There's a lot of implied requirements in these build your own adventure type of standards. So those are really difficult and challenging for utilities to get right. Supply chain is one of those right now, SIP 13. It's just complicated by the fact that the words of the standard itself are confusing. Then there's a lot of guidance that doesn't come from NERC, it's coming from outside that have been kind of adopted by NERC that all utilities, most utilities have just said, okay, that's what we'll do. And that's not necessarily right either. So, you know, it's really challenging for any utility to be looking at those standards and feel comfortable that they're doing it right. And then almost inevitably, you're going to get an auditor that has a vision of what it's supposed to be, and they're going to ding you on something that you, how would I know? It doesn't say it in the standard. So the other ones are more transactional type of things like SIP 4, where you're doing quarterly reviews, where you're doing CVAs on a regular basis. Sometimes those are difficult because first, remembering to do them. Second is because there's a zero tolerance failure situation here. You miss one thing, you're going to be in a situation where you're in a possible non-compliant state, and that's not fun either. So the more transactional, the more challenging it is because current way that it's being audited is one failure is a violation. So it's painful. Yeah.
Will the SIP standards ever be replaced with something else?
Yes, eventually. I don't know when, because everything gets replaced at some point. So you can't say that it won't be. I don't see that in the near future at all. But I could see that there's a time when that might be needed. It might need to go to a different department. Instead of being at a, well, currently how we have it is FERC, who's the commissioners at a federal level, you know, set up this ERO, which is the reliability organization, which is not a federal government position. It's not a government. It's a private sector that has applied and won the role to be an ERO, and that's NERC. NERC currently holds that contract, and so you call them kind of quasi-government, but they're not really government. They're private sector, and they own those standards, and they own the compliance responsibility with the different regions throughout North America. And so that model may rub somebody wrong eventually, right? Because that model is using a group that existed before. NERC existed since the 60s. We have regional entities that have been there for decades and decades before the SIP standards, and they have a relationship with their members, the electric sector members. So there's always been this, we're here to help you. And you know, the SIP standards should be, I'm here to help you too. But you know, if you look at it from a congressional type of a level, and you're looking down and you're going, well, how friendly are they being? You know, are they really being tough on these people to make sure they're doing what they're doing, or is there, you know, some kind of softness to the standard, to the auditing, to the approach on this? And so I can see in the future that somebody might say, we're done with this. You guys aren't doing what we want you to do. You're not being as hard as you need to be. And that's going to likely be driven, unfortunately, by how bad things fail. If utilities start having more issues, more cyber attacks, more failures like in North Carolina on the physical security side, where the substations got shot up, or where you have Colonial Pipeline with the ransomware situation, more of that is going to make people think more about, do we need to do change? Do we need to move this to a different set of standards? So it's possible, not right away though. One of the things that I've been involved in for years is helping utilities, helping critical infrastructure owners and operators get better at what they do. Physical cyber operational side, helping build those processes that really make a difference, and building programs and solutions that can help fight against these terrible things that can happen. You know, heaven forbid anything bad happens, but you want to be able to have that capability, and it's hard. It's hard to find the resources to do so. It's hard to find people that actually have been there and done it. We're Archer. We have a slew of people that have experience in your environment, in your world, and have hands-on solutions for almost anything you can think of that's related to protecting the critical infrastructure. We want to help, we're passionate about it, and we hope you give us a call.
If you need assistance protecting your critical infrastructure, reach out and contact Archer today.